On the 4th of July 1946, 200,000 people gathered on a hill near the town of Gdansk in Poland. Before them, a row of gallows had been installed. One by one, 11 bound prisoners are noosed on the back of American military trucks. When the signal is given, the trucks drive forward, letting the war criminals drop down to their deaths. Among the executed were the commandant of Stutthof concentration camp, Johann Pols, and 10 of his loyal officials, including 5 women, all of which were under 25 years of age. What made these young women commit some of the cruelest acts known to humankind? What exactly was the appeal they found in working as death dealers in a Nazi concentration camp? And how did the Allied forces manage to hunt them and bring them to justice? Welcome to the Marshall Memoirs. Death marches into Stutthof concentration camp. With 100,000 prisoners in total, Stutthof concentration camp was among the most important places of horror in Nazi Germany. Its history is bound up with Nazi Germany's expansion into Eastern Europe and Hitler's dream of a larger Lebensraum, or living space for ethnic Germans to live in. This meant that Slavs, Jews, and Romani gypsies needed to disappear from those places. The story of Stutthof is mostly unknown to the Western world, mainly because it was one of the camps that were liberated by the Red Army. However, it was one of the main camps in occupied Poland. It is unclear when it started operating, but there are documents of prisoners taken to Stutthof not long after the invasion of Poland in September 1939. Originally, the Germans set it up immediately after the invasion as an internment camp about 20 miles east of Danzig, or present-day Gdansk. Erected in a wooded area, its purpose was to hold primarily non-Jewish Poles deemed politically suspect. Jurisdiction of it fell under the control of the German police chief in Danzig, in what was called West Prussia. Stutthof stood apart from most Nazi incarceration and annihilation sites due to its proximity to so many bodies of water. To its west flowed the Vistula River, east was Vistula Bay, and north lay the Bay of Danzig and the Baltic Sea. This was very convenient as during World War II, inmates were brought to and evacuated from Stutthof by sea. It did resemble concentration camps like Dachau and Sachsenhausen in the nearness to a major urban centre, as Danzig had more than 400,000 inhabitants, mostly German. The Nazis wasted little time introducing terror into the operation of Stutthof. In October and November 1939, SS officials forced Polish political prisoners to participate in the murder of mental patients. These inmates were forced to dig mass graves in a forest near the West Prussian town of Neustadt for some 3,500 patients, all German nationals, who had been transported from mental hospitals in Pomerania, in northern Germany, and from Danzig itself. Then, SS men under the command of Kurt Eimann shot the victims, who were both men and women, on the back of the neck. The Stutthof inmates then had to fill in the graves. Once the graves were filled with dirt, Eimann's unit shot the concentration camp prisoners to ensure no witnesses survived. This early instance of mass atrocity took place outside of the parameters of the infamous T4 program for the clandestine mass murder of individuals with mental and physical disabilities. For the following 2 years, Stutthof functioned as a site of internment. In November 1941, the security police, headed by the notorious Nazi commander Reinhard Heydrich, took it over and designated it a place for labor education, which was another way of saying a camp for forced labor. This new phase lasted merely a few months, however, until SS leader Heinrich Himmler visited the camp in January 1942. He was impressed with the installations, so he officially categorized Stutthof as a concentration camp. It was only in 1944 that it became a major place in the Nazi camp system. Just like other concentration camps, Stutthof grew incredibly in the last years of the war. In 1943 and 1944, the Nazis enlarged the main camp itself and brought Ukrainian auxiliaries to help the SS crew. A special camp for women was eventually added, and the SS recruited dozens of German women to serve as guards. Security measures tightened in the second half of World War II. Common barbed wire fences were replaced with electrified barbed wire fences. As Soviet forces surged westward in the summer of 1944, Nazi authorities removed Jews from ghettos in Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia to Stutthof. They were forced to walk the entire way, a process that became known as the Death Marches. By the end of the summer of 1944, Stutthof's population expanded to more than 60,000, and it is calculated that at least 20,000 of them were Jewish women from Auschwitz-Birkenau. Soviet troops finally reached Stutthof on May 9, 1945, a few days after the fall of Berlin. The Soviets liberated roughly 100 people who had evaded SS evacuation measures and were hiding in the camp. Soon after liberation, Soviet authorities photographed the ovens and learned about Nazi efforts to demolish the camp's gas chamber. These photographs became instrumental in the trials after the war. High-heeled killers, the League of German Girls. The Nazi Party put much effort into recruiting women and to spread the Nazi ideals among them. For this, Hitler appointed Gertrude Scholz-Klink as head of the Reich Women's Leadership. She was tasked with teaching all women the Nazi slogan of children, kitchen, church. This had to be infused in women from a very young age. Thus, since March 1939, it became compulsory for 10-year-old girls to register for the Young Girls League, the female branch of the Hitler Youth. Girls were expected to then progress to the League of German Girls, or BDM in German, which was for ages 14 and older. The BDM encouraged girls to assume that the woman's world had to be their family, their husband, their children, and their home. Women were expected to have as many ethnic pure German children as possible. But although the public discourse of the Third Reich benefited married women, single women were very valuable to the German state. Because they had fewer household responsibilities, they had more time to devote to non-domestic activities. The outbreak of war on September 1939 anticipated more demands on women. During a speech before the German Reichstag, Adolf Hitler called for all women to integrate themselves into the combat community. This message was printed in the BDM Yearbook of 1940 and was reinforced by other content including patriotic lyrics, motivational quotations, and photographs of happy BDM girls. The message was that girls of all ages should prepare for war. As men took on combat roles, women were urgently required as auxiliaries, or as they were called, female helpers. The women served in distinct organizations, supporting various sectors of the German Army and the SS. They contributed to the functioning of the German Army, Navy, and Air Force, and each division had its own training system, methods of handling, and uniform for its respective female helpers. Two groups of women worked specifically in communications, a vital function for the German war effort. Their tasks, operating radios, telephones, and teletype machines, enabled both the Army and the SS to maintain links spanning their ever-expanding territory. In total, 8,000 women served as communication helpers over the course of the war and were sent to all German-occupied areas of Europe, supporting the Army through their administrative work. Around 3,000 women were trained as SS helpers to replace men as telephone, teletype, and radio operators, specifically in SS offices. Hundreds of German women, however, had more sinister jobs. Around 3,500 women worked in the camps, and they had a strict and complex hierarchy. Female guards were collectively known as SS helpers or SS Helferinnen, and 12 levels of supervision and responsibility were developed. The chief senior overseer was the most important of them, a level only reached by a SS helper at Ravensbrück. The second level was the camp leader, and again, few women actually attained this level. Senior overseers followed, and then the first guards, who were considered senior overseers in some of the smaller satellite camps. Then followed the report leader, the work recording leader, work input overseer, block leader, walk squad leader, dog guide overseer, and then simply overseer, and finally a job they called arrested overseer. Women frequently joined the ranks of the SS at a very young age, and it was not uncommon to see particularly ambitious young women ascending the ranks very quickly. The war effort required that more and more women took responsibility positions, and these responsibilities sometimes included the extermination of Jews and other camp prisoners. The sick and twisted games of Ewa Paradis. Among the lower-ranking women at Stutthof was Ewa Paradis. Ewa had been born in December 1920 to a German Protestant family who was stationed in the Polish city of Lauenburg, now called Leborg. There she spent her childhood and part of his youth years. She studied at a local public school until in 1935 she decided to quit school and begin working. This was what the Führer would have wanted for her. It remains unclear what kind of employment Ewa pursued. But in the late 1930s, she resided in several cities such as Wuppertal, Erfurt, and Lauenburg. When the war started, she felt the calling of Adolf Hitler and decided to help the government with her effort. In 1944, she enrolled in her local BDM branch, where she learned that the SS were recruiting ardent young Nazis to work in one of their many internment camps. In August 1944, when she was only 23 years old, Paradis arrived at the Stutthof SK3 camp for training as an overseer. 2 months later, she finished training and became a wardress. Training with the SS had been hard and exhausting. There, she learned the basics of prisoner management, including how to punish the prisoners so that they would respect her. Women, even more than men, were instructed to use physical violence like hitting, kicking, flogging, and other forms of abuse in order to control the inmates at the camps. In October 1944, she was reassigned to Stutthof's Bromberg Ost subcamp, which was only for women. There, she was able to put into practice everything she had learned in the previous months. According to statements at her trial, she would eagerly wait for new prisoners to arrive at Bromberg Ost early in the morning. Then, she would arbitrarily decide who was fit to work and who would go straight to the gas chambers. She seemed to enjoy playing God with those poor women. During early morning roll calls, Paradis would hit the inmates with a stick in their faces and bodies, laughing at their impotence to stop her. In the harsh winter months, she liked to pour cold water over the naked bodies of women, instructing them to stand still. If they moved, flogged them until they were left unconscious on the ground. Her lack of mercy or empathy earned her a reputation as one, if not the cruelest wardens at Bromberg Ost. This impressed her superiors, who decided that she was indispensable and they needed her back in Stutthof. From early 1945 and until she fled the camp in April, she dedicated her time at Stutthof to handpicking which prisoners should be sent immediately to the gas chambers. When operating at full capacity, up to 150 people could be killed in any given day at Stutthof. By this time, however, the threat of the Soviet army had become too tangible for Stutthof to function as usual. The evacuation of prisoners from the Stutthof camp system began on the 25th of January 1945. By that time, there were nearly 50,000 prisoners, most of them Jews, interned in the Stutthof camp system. The death marches, who had brought many people to Stutthof, now resumed westward. Most of the prisoners were marched in the direction of Lauenburg in eastern Germany. Cut off by advancing Soviet forces, the Germans forced the surviving prisoners to march back to Stutthof. In late April 1945, the remaining prisoners were removed from Stutthof by sea, since the camp was completely encircled by Soviet forces. In April 1945, Paradis accompanied one of the last transports of women prisoners to the Lauenburg subcamp and fled. During this evacuation, hundreds of prisoners were forced into the sea and shot. Over 4,000 Jews were sent by small boat to Germany, some to the Neuengamme concentration camp near Hamburg, and some to camps along the Baltic coast. It is thought that Paradis boarded one of the boats to Hamburg, as it was there where she finally was spotted by the Soviet army, captured, and sent to jail to await trial. The youngest killer, Elisabeth Becker. When Elisabeth Becker was executed next to Paradis and the rest of the camp authorities, she was about to turn 23. She was a Polish girl who had never been far from the place where she died. Becker had been born on the 20th of July 1923 at Nowy Stor, a town near Gdansk. She had married in 1936 and became a proud member of the Nazi Party and the BDM from 1938 to 1940. In 1939, she was happy that her homeland became part of the Third Reich. She worked in agriculture from 1941 to 1944 in Nowy Stor and joined the staff of Stutthof in September 1944, becoming an SS overseer in the women's camp of SK3 Stutthof, where she made selections for the gas chambers. Less than a year later, she was imprisoned and awaiting trial for crimes against humanity. One of the crimes that sent her to the gallows was the abandoning of evacuated prisoners at sea. On the 5th of May 1945, a barge full of starving prisoners was towed into harbour at Klintholm Haven in Denmark, where 351 of the 370 on board were saved. Shortly before the German surrender, some prisoners had been transferred to Malmö, Sweden, and released into the care of that neutral country. It has been estimated that around half of the evacuated prisoners, over 25,000, died during the evacuation from Stutthof and its subcamps, and some of the documents that decided their fate had Becker's signature on them. After Becker was condemned, she submitted an appeal for commutation of her death sentence directly to the Polish president. The court evaluated her case and recommended the commutation and substitution of a 15-year term of imprisonment, mostly because she had committed far fewer and less dreadful crimes than the others. After all, at 22, she was barely a child. However, the Polish president, Bolesław Bierut, rejected this request, and she was executed with the rest of the women. The vice-deputy of Danzig prison, Alojzy Nowicki, was in charge of organizing the executions. As there were no ropes available, he made the prisoners make their own out of plant fibers. This was quite easy. The difficult part was finding both Catholic and Protestant chaplains who were willing to minister to the prisoners facing death. All the local Protestant ministers refused, on the grounds that they could never be impartial. The secret police then tipped Nowicki of a German minister who had been hiding in Sopot, so he went to fetch him. He found the priest cowering inside the attic of a house, dressed in his service garb and holding on to a suitcase. The minister was transported to Stutthof to spend time with the prisoners and talk to them. The executioners didn't bother with formality. The criminals were not granted the honor of being put to death by a professional executioner. Even at the Nuremberg trials, a man who claimed to be a professional was sought to take care of the operation. At Stutthof, on the other hand, a fleet of open trucks brought the prisoners to the execution ground, their hands and legs tied with cords. The trucks were backed under the gallows and the condemned were made to stand on the back of the trucks. A simple cord noose was put around their necks, and when the preparations were complete, each truck was driven forward, leaving them suspended. They were not hooded and given only a short drop, meaning that they died from strangulation rather than from a broken neck. Witnesses claimed that some of them struggled for some time after suspension. Documents from the time mention that one man and two women struggled and fought with their guards prior to being hanged, although it does not clarify which of the women put up this sort of resistance. The others seemed to accept their fate calmly. The whole event was recorded by official press photographers, who were among the thousands that gathered to witness the hangings. Mad Jenny Wanda Barkmann, the beautiful spectre. Jenny Wanda Barkmann was one of the last female overseers to reach the camp, arriving at Stutthof in 1944. However, she quickly earned her place among the Nazis' most wicked. Jenny Wanda Barkmann was born on May 30, 1922 in Hamburg, Germany. Some accounts claim that she came from a low-income home, but everything points to her having a normal childhood. When she turned 11, Adolf Hitler became the Chancellor of Germany. When she was 16, Jewish homes, businesses and synagogues were attacked during the Night of Broken Glass, which also happened in Hamburg. Barkmann was considered a stunning young woman. It is reported that she had initially hoped to use her beauty to become a fashion model, but as the war dragged on, she changed her mind. In 1944, the 21-year-old applied to become an overseer, and she was appointed to Stutthof. Half of the 100,000 people that were deported to Stutthof during the entire war were still there when Barkmann became a guard there. She was one of just 3,700 women to take on such a position, out of 55,000 total guards in all the Nazi concentration camps. However, she was not just another female guard. Barkmann quickly made a name for herself as one of Stutthof camp's most brutal wardens. According to testimonies, she showed no hesitation when it came to beating prisoners, sometimes to death. She also regularly sent women and even children to the gas chambers, who she and other guards found too weak or sick to work. Due to her looks and brutality, Jenny Wanda Barkmann became known as the Beautiful Spectre, while others called her Mad Jenny. Due to her brutality too, she came to be one of the most wanted Nazi criminals when the Soviet army liberated Stutthof. Barkmann managed to stay hidden for 4 months, but was captured in May 1945 at the Gdansk train station. She was trying to escape by train. While awaiting trial, and even during the proceedings, she was reported to have flirted with her male guards. Also, she wore a different hairstyle each day, proving she cared more about her appearance than about the lives of those she sent to the gas chambers. After being condemned, she was heard claiming that life was a pleasure, and like every pleasure, it was bound to be short. She did not live to celebrate her 24th birthday. During her interrogation, Barkmann claimed that she had always treated Jewish prisoners well, and even said that she had saved some of them from death. But the testimonies against her were too strong, and her reputation had been already established. Indeed, dozens of survivors of Stutthof testified against Barkmann in court, describing the brutal atrocities she committed as an overseer. Even her lawyer admitted that Barkmann was guilty of the crimes, but argued that it was because she was mentally ill. No sane person, he suggested, could have done what she did at the concentration camp. Barkmann was in a good mood throughout the trial, often bursting with contemptuous laughter. She never asked for forgiveness, shed a tear, or showed any remorse. 3 days before the execution, the Gdansk media printed the day and time of the execution, inviting all people to attend. Many factories gave workers a day off and provided transportation for those who wanted to go to the event. The city administration was afraid of a mob lynching, so there was a large police and military presence in the background. People who were far from the gallows climbed trees and house roofs in order to be able to witness such an unusual event. When the flatbed trucks with the condemned appeared, the crowd started to throw stones at them. The military had to shoot into the air to warn people. After the noose had been tied around Barkmann's neck, however, the truck she stood on would not start. The crowd let out a murmur of frustration as Barkmann stood before them, still alive. Then, a former Stutthof prisoner ran up and pushed Barkmann off the truck bed. Jenny Wanda Barkmann died instantly. The media reported that as her body swayed in the breeze, many people in the crowd flocked to her body, trying to rip off a piece of fabric or a button to keep as a souvenir. Eventually, her corpse was sent to the anatomical theatre in Gdańsk, along with the bodies of other criminals, to be used as a visual aid for medical students. It was later disposed of as biological waste. The mysterious and cruel Wanda Klaff. Wanda Klaff is without a doubt the least known of the Stutthof female overseers. This is not due to her being a common guard with no participation in the extermination, but because she was reserved and did not talk much. She had been born in Gdańsk to German parents as Wanda Kalaczynski in 1922. Her father was a railway worker. The family name was changed to Kalden in 1941 so that they would not be mistaken for Jews. Wanda finished school in 1938 and worked in a jam factory until 1942. That year she married Willy Klaff and became a housewife, then a streetcar operator. She did not keep any of her jobs for long. In 1944, Klaff joined the Stutthof concentration camp staff at Stutthof's Proust subcamp in present-day Pruszcz, where she is said to have abused many of the prisoners. On the 5th of October 1944, she arrived at Stutthof's Rusocin subcamp in present-day northern Poland. Like Barkmann and Paradis, she supervised the inmates' roll call every day. This was supposed to happen 3 times a day, but in reality it was whenever the overseer seemed fit. Sometimes Klaff organized several roll calls in the same day. She would call the women out of the barracks and stand at the entrance with a whip, hitting each of the inmates as they were exiting through the main door of the barracks. Some of the inmates tried to jump through the windows to avoid the whip, but this proved to be worse in some cases. After a week at the camp, every prisoner's body was covered from head to toes in bruises, either from the whip or from jumping through the window. Some of the inmates could not tolerate the beatings and died from the injuries, while the rest knew that they would be sent to the gas chambers as soon as some of the female overseers classified them as unfit to work. There was simply no way out. Klaff did not wait for the Soviets to reach the camp. She fled in early 1945 and tried to resume her common life as it was before. But on the 11th of June 1945, she was arrested by Polish officials. In prison, she fell ill from typhoid fever and finally experienced some of the pain her prisoners had to endure for months. When she regained her health, she stood trial together with the rest of female overseers and some male personnel. At the trial, she did not express regret. She claimed that she was just devoted to her work at the camps, striking at least 2 prisoners every day. According to witnesses, this number was hugely underrated. The harrowing testimonies exposed the real nature of Wanda Klaff, which was to be cruel and relentless with the people she considered to be inferior. After a somewhat short trial, Klaff was convicted and received the death sentence. She joined the other women at the row of gallows on July 4, 1946. She was 24 years old. Swift but deadly, Gerda Steinhoff. Gerda Steinhoff worked at Stutthof for less than 1 year, yet she became known almost immediately among the prisoners for her extreme cruelty. It is thought she was born in 1922, although details about her early life are scarce. During her teenage years, she worked as a domestic servant on a farm near Gdansk in the north of Poland. After the start of World War II, she found work in Gdansk itself, first as a cook and then as a tram conductor. In 1944, she married and had a child. Thanks to her husband and her line of work, they became friends with Nazi soldiers stationed in the Nazi Langfuhr area. This is how she came to learn that there was a shortage of staff at the Stutthof concentration camp, and the Nazis were recruiting especially women. Without thinking twice, Gerda Steinhoff joined the camp staff at Stutthof. Of course, she was aware of the reputation the camp had as a brutal site of persecution and extermination. She just wanted to be a part of it. It appears that she was a keen learner, as Steinhoff's role there would evolve rapidly. Just a few months after joining, she was promoted to Blockleiterin, or block leader, in the Stutthof SK3 women's camp. This role placed her in a position of direct authority over female prisoners. Survivors' accounts paint a horrifying picture of Steinhoff's cruelty. She reportedly participated in selections for the gas chambers, condemning countless individuals to a horrific death. Witnesses also spoke of her sadistic treatment of prisoners, reveling in inflicting pain and suffering. By the end of 1944, her actions were deemed so valuable to the camp's operation that she was promoted to SS Oberaufseherin, a senior guard position. On December 1, 1944, she was reassigned to the Bromberg Ost female subcamp of Stutthof, located in Bydgoszcz near Danzig. At the camp, she received a medal for her loyalty and service to the Third Reich on the 25th of January 1945. She was dedicated and utterly devoted to her job and was known as an extremely ruthless supervisor. She tries to stay at the camp for as long as she could, but seeing how the war was coming to an end, she decided to flee the camp and went home. Gerda Steinhoff's stay at home didn't last long. On 25th of May 1945, she was arrested by Polish officials and sent to prison. She stood trial with the other SS women and Karpos. She was convicted and condemned to death for her involvement in the selection and her sadistic abuse of prisoners. During the trial, Gerda showed no remorse and instead made jokes the entire time. When asked by the judge about her activities in the camp and whether she had ever hit a prisoner, she claimed to have had a purely bureaucratic job. She tried to pose for a meaningless paper pusher who had no direct contact with the prisoners. Unluckily for her, some 200 of her prisoners had survived, and many of them testified about the horrors they suffered at the hands of Steinhoff. The day of the executions, it is said that the crowd attacked the hanging bodies, especially the body of Steinhoff. They cut off pieces of the rope, which, according to folklore, brought good luck. They also took pieces of fabric from their clothes, buttons, and whatever souvenir they could get from some of the cruelest women in human history. Seeing this, the commanding officer ordered that the bodies were quickly taken down. The bodies were donated to the Medical Academy in Danzig and used in anatomy courses. The hangings at Stutthof were some of the last public executions to take place in the country. The last public execution took place on July 21, 1946, in Poznan. It was the execution of Warthegau Gauleiter and Governor Arthur Greiser, former president of Danzig Senate. With Gerda Steinhoff, the last of the 5 convicted female overseers at Stutthof, lost her life. The one who got away, Herta Bothe. When analyzing the reasons behind the hanging of the 5 women from Stutthof, it is difficult to think that more heinous crimes had been committed in the camp and that its perpetrators remained free for most of their lives. Herta Bothe, one of the main women concentration camp staff in all of Germany, was born in 1921 in Tetterow, in the district of Mecklenburg. While most female overseers at the Waffen-SS barely knew how to read and write, Bothe was not only literate but quite proficient in writing. When she was young, she was known as a helpful, caring girl who helped her classmates with their homework. She also helped her father in his small timber shop while working as a nurse at an industrial hospital. Everyone who knew her claimed that she always helped people in need. That is why in 1939 she joined the League of German Girls. After joining the BDM, her demeanor started to change drastically. Right from the start, she developed a passion and an ability for sports, earning her a proposal to be a camp guard at one of the country's concentration camps at Ravensbrück. In 1942, she underwent a 4-month-long training in order to join the SS as a supervising staff. She excelled at the training, and before the year of 1942 was over, she was sent to her first destination, Stutthof concentration camp. That is where she earned her nickname, the Stutthof sadist. Unlike some of the other female overseers, she knew how to handle a gun, threatened the inmates with her Luger all the time, and whenever she felt like it, she would shoot one of the inmates point blank. During dinner time each day, she was said to punish between 7 and 8 prisoners every day by withdrawing their plates. She would keep them from eating the bread or drinking water. She constantly humiliated the prisoners, and sometimes even left them alone to die. In January 1945, 24-year-old Herta Bothe led one of the death marches out of Stutthof and into Bergen-Belsen, stopping by briefly at Auschwitz. The procession reached Bergen-Belsen between February 20th and 26th. This is where the British found her in April 1945. During the Belsen trial, held in September 1945, Herta denied all the accusations, and although there were multiple witnesses that attested to her brutal abuse, she was only condemned to 10 years in prison for using her pistol against the inmates. This may seem like a very light sentence, but she never even stayed for 10 years in prison. As a token of indulgence, the British government freed her on the 22nd of December 1951. That way, one of the cruelest women to ever set foot on Stutthof lived the rest of her life as a free woman. She changed her last name to Lange and died in the year 2000 while still living in Germany. 2021 processes. Justice did not stop with the executions of 1946. As it is well known, crimes against humanity do not prescribe, so perpetrators have been tried decades after the war ended. In 2018, for example, 94-year-old Johann Rehbogen, who had served in Stutthof between 1942 and 1944, was identified and brought to trial. He was tried by a juvenile court in Münster because at the age when he committed the crimes, he was not 21 yet. He was accused of murdering more than 100 Polish prisoners and 77 Soviet POWs using Zyklon B gas. In 2019, SS guard Bruno Day was convicted of contributing to the killing of more than 5,000 Stutthof prisoners between 1944 and 1945. He was 93 years old, but the latest and most shocking case is that of a 96-year-old Irmgard Fürchner, a former secretary at the Stutthof concentration camp. In 2021, she went to trial in Germany for alleged complicity in the murder of more than 11,000 people imprisoned there. When she was discovered, she tried to flee, but due to her old age, she did not get far. She was living at a retirement home in Quickborn at the moment. When news came that she was being sought after by the authorities, she hailed a taxi to take her to the outskirts of Hamburg. She was arrested several hours later and placed in police custody for 5 days before being fitted with an electronic wrist tag. Irmgard was taken into the court in Itzehoe, northern Germany, strapped into a blue ambulance wheelchair. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, she covered her face with a medical mask during the trial. She had been only 18 when she started working at Stutthof camp in Nazi-occupied Poland as the secretary to its commandant, Paul Werner Hopper, so she also had to be tried in a juvenile court. She is perhaps the oldest person ever to be tried as a juvenile. As her case garnered considerable interest, intensive security needed to be involved, and even the court had to be moved to a prefabricated warehouse on the town's outskirts in order to keep the curious public outside. According to the news reports, she spoke only to confirm her name and address and that she was widowed, but she was otherwise not willing to respond to questions from the court, according to her lawyer. She did not need to, as her crimes were very well documented. After just a few days of trial, the indictment was read out to the packed courtroom, and Irmgard listened carefully from behind a glass screen erected to protect her from coronavirus infection. The judge considered that she had been aware of all happenings at Stutthof because of her key administrative position, as well as the relatively compact layout of the camp. A particularly gruesome practice carried out at Stutthof, which came up during the trial, was the tricking of prisoners into believing their height was to be measured, when in fact SS men disguised as doctors would position them in order to shoot them in the neck from a viewing point in an adjoining room. This method was used to shoot around 30 prisoners within a 2-hour time frame. The bodies were subsequently hosed down, carted away, and burnt. Detainees were also forced into chambers filled from the rooftop with the poisonous gas Zyklon B. The court referenced witness accounts relating how those trapped inside screamed in agony, clawing at their skin and tearing out their own hair due to the pain. Irmgard Fürchner will be 100 years old in March 2025, but she is no longer a free citizen. Many women have held prominent positions in Nazi concentration camps. Ilse Koch, the Witch of Buchenwald, and Irma Grese, the Hyena of Auschwitz, may the more famous ones, but we cannot forget the 5 female Stutthof guards executed in 1946. These young girls of 20-something have been responsible for unspeakable atrocities, including ending the lives of tens of thousands of innocent people in northern occupied Poland. Their crimes, and the age when they committed them, are shocking, but they are also a reminder that evil lurks all the time and can take many forms, even the form of a stunning young woman.